Let me tell you a little something. I don't believe in curses. You may point out that early video game movies, the recent Tokyo Olympics, or hopes of the Canucks winning the Stanley Cup are cursed and destined to fail. But not really. Those happen because of misfortune and incompetence. The reason why I'm talking about this is because of the following rumor. Putting the term evolution in the title of your project will lead to a guaranteed failure, or so they claim. Okay, then there's X-Men Evolution, which is quite good. Pearl Jam's Duty Evolution is a fan favorite, and if you want to go even further, Mitsubishi made a long line of Lancers and other cars within the Evolution title since the early 90s. I'm saying this because it's not a curse. There never was a curse. So when Acclaim went on to achieve moderate success by dumping out licensed titles left and right in the late 80s to 90s, they kinda dropped the ball hard in the 2000s. So hard in fact that their most popular titles weren't able to save their sinking ship. One of said titles being Turok. On today's first special episode, we're going back in time to the Y2K, slaughtering Dino Men with our big guns, and aces high in the sky with our Dino Birds. This is the game that showed a lot of potential, but could not deliver. We got some crazy things to show y'all, including content that hasn't surfaced on the internet before. This video will mark the first time anyone has laid eyes on this content for over 20 years. So ladies, gents, trans, and dinosaur hunters, welcome to Lost Legends, Turok, Duty Evolution. Now before we get into this video, I'd like to give a huge shout out to Evolution Archive for helping me make this episode possible. As the title suggested, this is only part 1 of the whole shebang. Part 2 will be exclusively on his channel, where you can find even more Turok content, as well as videos about Fight Club, the game. Go check him out after this video. Our journey begins way back. As in 70 years ago, the comic book world got introduced to what is now one of the longest running comics in American history, Turok, Son of Stone. Before we remembered him as the dino-nuking, alien-killing, space-time traveling Native American warrior saving the universe, he, along with Andar, were just your average Sac Queen youth, who just so happened to stumble upon to the Lost Land by accident, and end up going on some jolly good fun adventures with high-class artwork on the front cover. Just look at these things. First published by Dell Comics as part of the 4-Color Comics, the original comic run went on to last 130 issues, from 1954 to 1982. That's a great run, despite being a pretty obscure comic from the pre-internet age. Never underestimate the value of sharing information via word of mouth. Then in 1993, the comic got itself a then-modern reboot under Valiant Comics. Valiant's take on Turok is a little more sci-fi than its predecessor, likely having been inspired by Jurassic Park. The Lost Land went from being a different world to an interdimensional dumping ground, consisting of whatever happens to be unfortunate enough to get sucked through small rifts within time and space as we know it. This is why the Lost Lands contain anything from Cadillacs, dinosaurs, aliens, mutants, androids, demons, and so much more. These are worth a read if you got the time. In 1987, Acclaim Entertainment got founded by Greg Fishbach, Robert Holmes, and Jim Skoropaski in Oyster Bay, New York. In their early years, the publisher released a bunch of arcade ports and licensed trade for the NES and Game Boy. No matter the quality, they made a hell of a profit. In the 90s, everything changed when Acclaim got the publishing rights to the hottest game of 1992, Mortal Kombat. Not only was Mortal Kombat in the highlight of controversy with its hardcore violence, it's one of the few games responsible for the creation of the ESA and the ESRB. Oh, and Fishbach co-founded them. Quite the coincidence. In 1994, Acclaim set their sights on the comics industry, and bought Voyager Communications for $65 million. Voyager was Valiant's parent company, officially making it Acclaim's property. This meant that Acclaim also got the rights to their various IPs, like Exo Manowar, Shadow Man, and of course, Turok. A year later, they bought some developer studios they had worked with in the past, like Sculptured Software, Probe Entertainment, and Iguana Entertainment. Iguana, now under new management, were given a load of Valiant comics to use as source material, which led them to find out about Turok, and start making a game based off of that. I would love to tell you how the Turok games on the N64 came to be, but for now, let's skip the part where Iguana did a home run on the 4 Turok games and move on to the main feature. After finishing up Turok 3 in 2000, the dawn of the 6th generation in gaming had risen. This meant that Iguana, later renamed Acclaim Studios Austin in 1999, had to develop a game that wasn't on the N64 for once, forcing them to step out of their comfort zone and learn how to develop software for the then new trio of consoles: Sony's PlayStation 2, Nintendo's GameCube, and console wars newcomer, Microsoft, with the Xbox. At least they didn't have to deal with the N64's hardware limitations anymore, instead used optical discs that could hold a lot more data. As development on a sequel to Turok 3 came to a grinding halt, development on another Turok game was about to begin, and as of January 2000 no less. I mean, what was there left to do for the Turok lineage? Oblivion was prevented, Josh was dead, Adon wanted to bring Josh back to life, which obviously went nowhere, and we got introduced to her mysterious reskin at the very end. The tie-in comic doesn't help either. So instead of making a Turok 4, or their Valiant multiverse idea, they decided to make a prequel, a soft reboot where the game goes back to its roots, and we once more step into the boots of Tal'Set. Plans for this new game would feature a cinematic story, a diverse set of weapons, advanced AI, and most importantly, dinosaurs, and lots of wildlife. And let's not forget the most heavily advertised feature of all, rideable creatures, more specifically the Dino Bird. On January 8, 2001, IGN reported that a new Turok game was revealed at a press conference in Austin, Texas. Despite Dean Spears' claims to the contrary, it officially got announced on May 17th that same year. The appropriately named Turok Evolution was finally shown to the public via pre-rendered teasers at E3 2001. By January 2002, the game's development was roughly 50% complete, and on January 15th, a playable build was made available to the press in their offices. A month later, the Game Boy Advance port got announced, and on May 2002, a playable build of Turok Evolution was shown at E3. They claimed that the game would make its release on September 3rd, aka Turok Tuesday, but it got released 2 days early on September 1st, as Turok Bloody Sunday. This all sounds fine and dandy, but behind the scenes, they're late trouble. Now, you may be thinking that the team was only working on Turok Evolution and their new and improved Quagmire game engine. But, well, you'd be wrong. They were also working on their T-rated platformer called Jinx, which later became Vex. That makes 2 versions of a brand new game engine for 2 games on 3 different unexplored platforms. In other words, they bit off more than they could chew. Now don't get me wrong, Acclaim Studios Austin consisted of very talented people, and industry veterans that are still making amazing things to this very day. But, developing the Turok game on a new platform in a matter of 2.5 years, with the other things I've mentioned, would definitely take its toll. This unfortunately meant that they had to cut a lot of content that was planned for the game in order to meet their now then earlier deadline. Another question to add is that why didn't Acclaim, the publisher, delay the game to give the devs some extra time to polish things up, instead of cutting the deadline by 2 whole days? Boy, let me tell you something. This is Acclaim. They're not exactly known for their wise decisions. Their ad campaigns were especially crazy, with them using everything from carrier pigeons to paying people $10,000 in savings bonds for naming their newborns Turok, which ended up being a sham in the end. But to be frank, this is the least offensive marketing campaign they've done during that time. I mean, those gravestone ads are a sight to behold. Anyways, after 2.5 years of game development, was it any good? Let's find out. Turok Evolution was released on September 1st, 2002. In my opinion, this was sadly the weakest link of the Acclaim franchise. Many people, including a certain Blue Skeleton guy have made videos about it, claim this game is kinda meh. So, since the game is now over 20 years old, how does it hold up? Graphically, it doesn't. Let's get this out of the way, the game looks like trash, mostly because of the low-res textures. I know that graphics aren't the most important thing, but comparing it to other games from 2002 like Time Splitters 2, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, or even Gran Turismo 3, it's not hard to see why people weren't exactly impressed. While Turok 3 on the N64 was pushing the console to its limits with facial animations, high poly models, and 2 playable characters, Turok Evolution appeared to meet the minimum requirements for a game of that time. Let me remind you that the former was packed into a 64MB cartridge, as opposed to Turok Evolution's 4.7GB DVD, or a 1.46GB GameCube disc. Guess bigger isn't always better. Now the front cover gives you a very, very clear indication what the game was about. Some goddamn dinosaurs. Mighty dinosaurs, fight the holy war. If there's one game this game excels in, it's the wildlife department. I mean, compies, raptors, gators, pteranodons, stegosaurs, gazelles, monkeys, you name it. From reptiles to amphibians to birds, animals, and insects, nothing got left out. Mostly. The game's soundtrack was composed by Nelson Everhart of Turok 3 and Wizard 101 fame. Another thing that the game did very well was hype the player up and set an awesome atmosphere in the first levels, making a strong impression. The same can't be said for the remaining 14 chapters. The plot for this game isn't particularly groundbreaking. It begins in the year 1886, where native Sequin tribe is in a losing battle against an army led by the Red Snake, Captain Bruckner. After their chief got capped, your boy Tal'Set avenged him by clubbing the good captain's arm off, sending the blue-coated bastard off a cliff. It's then when a beacon that was activated of a dying chief opens up a portal, the shockwave of which flings Tal'Set into the Lost Land. Can we get a good replay on that clubbing? According to the FMV, his arm is still intact. After being saved from the brink of death by the villagers and a robed man, he finds himself on his way to meet the man who saved his life. Our shirtless protagonist went through numerous trials across the jungle, from surviving in a rabid baboon pit, to flying the Quetzalcoatlus across the canyons, and even blowing up an airship, until he finally met the robed seer named Tarkeen. He reveals to Tal'Set that he saved him so that he may take up the mantle of the Son of Stone, and, in turn, break his curse. Tal'Set initially declined, but fell under his sway once he told about the Slug's attack on the river village, and the kidnapping of the village elder, the Wise Father. So, Tal'Set heads to the mountains, fought some more lizardmen, a T-Rex, and even an artillery ankylosaur. Then he does some solid snaking at the Slag compound. Rescued the Wise Father, took the Slug's war plans, and came face to face with Bruckner, whom the Slugs has been oh so kind to. They even fitted him with a cybernetic arm. He ventured on through the dark jungles of the Shadowlands, flew his dino bird through the canyons, fought his way through the suspended city, killed a Styracosaur, lit some M80s, twice, and later sacrificed the city in order to give the people of Galliana some time to prepare for the incoming Slag threat. Then he infiltrated a walking fortress on a souped-up sauropod known as the Juggernaut, sabotaged his cannons, met Tyrannus in person, double-tapped the Juggernaut, saved the fabled City of Light in the process. Only one thing remains: a less than climactic battle against Bruckner, who's riding an armored T-Rex. Tal'Set used his ingenuity to squash Bruckner flat with a well-placed quad shotgun blast to a nearby palm tree.
You haven't changed a thing, you know. There's always gonna be someone like me to hunt you down.
I do not fear you, Red Snake.
I am Turok.
While Tyrannus is coping and seething at his L's, Tal'Set is seen applying some war paint and finally accepts the title of Turok, the Son of Stone. Yeah, this is in abridged fashion. The story is riddled with plot holes and inconsistencies up the wazoo. For example, at the end of Chapter 5 where Tal'Set and Wisefather were escorted out by lift, Chapter 6 starts with you entering the dark jungles for seemingly no reason. Or how about the end of Chapter 11 where you escape the collapsing city, only to suddenly know the whereabouts of the Juggernaut with no prior backstory given. Or the end of Chapter 14 where the Galliana level just ends, and you're thrown into the final chapter with, again, no context to speak of. This is one of the woes of being a rush product, and the story itself clearly took the back seat in order for them to, well, get the game done. Here's one more where you reach the end of Chapter 1, supposedly guided by a guy named Jun. More on that later.
Well, I see Jun got you here in one piece. Let's get going. You're not scared of heights, are you?
When it comes down to level design, Turok evolution is pretty linear. Now, linear level design isn't always bad, just like how complex level design isn't always good, like Turok 2 and their long-ass mazes. The first level I mentioned earlier are by far the best looking, showing off the wildlife and such. The other chapters take place in the mountains, canyons, and during one chapter, in the dark jungle, with traps and raptor ambushes around every corner. Much like with other Rush and unfinished games, the further you get into the story, the worse the levels become, essentially turning into corridor-based shooting galleries. The city ones are especially disappointing, as they look very generic and samey, apart from a few key moments like gunning down ships while you're on a tram, or seeing your enemies get pushed into their deaths by sewage. I mean, it takes place in a city suspended hundreds of feet above a chasm, and somehow it looks boring. The Slag Fortress is quite fun, but it gets repetitive as you yet again have to traverse through identical looking hallways. Also, the final level, as I said, less than climactic, with you having to destroy 3 spawners, this big thing that's apparently supposed to be a Perlin, and Bruckner, who's more allergic to trees than George of the Jungle. And then, the gameplay. For the most part, it's fine. You move a bit slow, you jump like a constipated Mario brother, you can fall off cliffs easier than you can stay on them, but despite that, it's okay once you get the hang of it. Yeah, you see all this wildlife? Well, you can kill them all without consequence. Be mean to them monkeys, push King Julian off the cliff, kill that flying pteranodon, and not even the blimps are safe from a few darts. Being a Rush product, there are some gameplay elements that are underpolished, like weirdly specific stealth, poor AI, inconsistent fall damage which can be negated by backing into a steep slope, and climbing with two-handed weapons. Certified realism. The game's most standout feature are the flight segments. Once you reach the end of the first chapter, the second one starts with you flying the Quetzalcoatlus. This is the part people gave up and used cheats for some reason. I've yet to meet someone else that's beaten this game before without using FMNFB to skip ahead. Here's a solid recreation of people playing through Chapter 2 for the first time.
More air units inbound! Watch your tail! More air units inbound! Watch your tail! It's gonna get a little tight up ahead. Watch those trees and don't hurt my bird. Whoa! Check your speed! Check your speed! Woo!
I'm guessing that people like to over-exaggerate because once you get the hang of it, and read the manual, which none of you did, controlling the Dino Bird is not even that bad. Chapter 2 may be drawn out, but it's at least as well designed to Chapter 7, where you die constantly. There's only a total of 4 flight chapters. Well, 4.5, because Chapter 12 is only 1 level. Even though the game has a wide range of wildlife, including hostile ones, the enemies you encounter the most are the slag. They come in many flavors, from scouts, grenadiers, snipers, soldiers, shotgunners, guards, rocketeers, monks, generals, rapiers, and the big beast known as purlins. They usually attack you in squads, take cover, and even melee if you get too close. One thing that I love is that sometimes the enemies will drop their guns and run away, or outright surrender if suffer enough damage. Yeah, surrendering to my war club! Speaking of war clubs, the best aspect in the game in my opinion are the weapons. Some people said it doesn't hold up like the previous entries, but I'd say they're wrong. You start the game with your bow and the mighty war club, which is good for stealth. During your journey, you pick up a pistol, shotgun, grenades, rocket launcher, fletched gun, and plasma cannon. You can even get some novelty weapons like the dark matter cube, which functions as a black hole grenade, the spider mine where you control a small spider, and the gravity disruptor that lets you grab enemies and fling them out of the skybox. The bow has some alternate ammo types, like explosive arrows for splash damage, and poison arrows to see your enemy lose their lunch, and then their life. Many of these also have their own upgrades to find, like the tech bow, a quad barrel attachment for the shotgun, an 18-barrel minigun for the fletched gun, and my personal favorite, turning the pistol into a sniper rifle. But I like to do this instead. Now you might be wondering, hey Mace, where's the cerebral boar? And to that I say, meet its cousin, the swarm boar. Unlike the Phantasm orb launcher, this one blows off the limbs of your enemies first and then the head, leaving them a Dead Island Collector's Edition statue. This is a good time to tell you that the game's a bit more gorier than the previous. I mean, you can blow off limbs off enemies, see chunks of giblets from shotgun blasts, or outright explode frogs which pack a lot more meat than they should. Same goes for enemies falling from high places. Sadly, most creatures don't get the same dismemberment treatment, meaning that you can't blow a raptor's head off like in Turok 2. That never gets old. You know what sucks? Apart from the lack of weapon wheels, who's the Einstein coder thought it was a good idea to lock away some of your weapons for each new level or chapter? I assume it's a late addition because in some levels, there's ammo for weapons you can't equip, like the pistol which you'll never see again after chapter 6. Multiplayer was fun when I was a kid, but I'm not sure it holds up nowadays since I lack any mates to play with. You have your standard deathmatch, CTF, last man standing, and monkey tag. And there's also the flight deathmatch if you're into that. There's some interesting modes like Hunter, where one player has all the power-ups, and another player has to kill the hunter to become one. And Warrior Rage, where killing opponents increase your power. The 3 other modes are pretty much deathmatch presets. You can choose from almost any character from the game, as well as 2 raptors. Oh, and the maps are quite fun, like the Selkirk Complex where you're fighting tree houses with raptors waiting for someone at the bottom. And Sands of Hueon where it's a war-torn beachhead with trenches. If you want a balanced match, remove the rocket launcher, plasma cannon, spider mine, and dark matter cube. Yeah, those weapons are cheap. So, compared to multiplayer, I tried Time Splitters 2 and realized how fleshed out that was. Not only you got boss to fight, but also a wide range of maps to choose from, characters up the wazoo, and even more game modes. Sadly, Little Mace never get to experience Time Splitters 2 when it came out. The game is quite a bit longer than the previous entries, as it takes around 8 to 10 hours to beat. I'm all for making a game lengthy, but not as drawn out. But consider what I talked about. Is it worth getting a copy of a game that consists of bad graphics, a story with plot holes, fighting through mostly corridors, flight sections that make you give up after the 2nd chapter, cheap deaths, and a multiplayer that was outclassed by its competitors? Maybe in short bursts, but not if you're planning on spending the whole day playing this, in my opinion. If you do want to play this, then the only consoles I recommend are the Xbox for the better graphics but locked at 30 FPS, or the GameCube for a consistent 60 FPS experience, but with atrocious load times and the worst textures of all the ports. The PS2 on the other hand is slightly inferior, with issues like an inconsistent frame rate, frame drops that go as low as 10 FPS, compressed sounds, and bad graphics. The footage you see has some slight FOV changes, but that's the Dolphin's free cam for you. 1 year later, a third-party dev known as Super Happy Fun Fun Limited farted out a PC port which was released exclusively in PAL regions. And it's much worse. There's no reverse engineered source port or Night Dive remaster that's going to save this one. The port is built off an earlier build of the Xbox version. The lighting and shaders are broken, see chapter 6 for a good comparison. The pistol sniper scope and Spider-Man's cameras are broken, the FOV is worse in widescreen, the in-game text doesn't scale on a higher resolution, and if you attempt to change the controls without installing some old drivers and turning on Windows compatibility, then the game wipes your keybinds from the face of the earth, rendering it unplayable and making it hard to exit the game. You may be asking, but Mace, my mouse control. Oh, the mouse controls are buggered too. Also, it kinda breaks the flame mode since turning tights to the mouse, and there's no cap in how tight you can turn, so if you have a higher DPI, you can do this.
After that transport jet, don't let them escape. In these larger areas, you can turn the bird all the way around. Try it out.
Some people say that playing an FPS with a controller is heresy and not ideal. But here's the thing. It's called preference. Okay, so you want to make this series an unfortunate event sting a little harder? The Game Boy Advance version by RFX Interactive is better than the game I've been talking about this whole time. I mean, you have 2 playable characters, including Jun, a full set of weapons that you can use for the duration of the game. You get to fight with the Bruck Man multiple times, and even Tyrannus in space. And best of all, it has co-op. But good luck on finding a friend who has a GBA, a copy of Turok Evolution, and a link cable. This one does have a few issues, like being hard as nails and using 2 passcodes for levels and weapons. Yeah, it's unfortunate that the game was released in the state it was in, but it's not the devs' fault, mostly. They did what they could with what little time they have, just to build 2 games from the ground up. They spent the first year on the Quagmire engine, and then the rest on the game itself, you know, while working on Vex. So just how different was the game while it was still being worked on? Let's find out. To answer that question, very. Unfortunately, we don't have access to the very early builds, or even the E3 demo. Luckily for us, a small handful of Turok Evolution prototypes has surfaced online in the past several years, some of which were done by Evil himself. Before we get to the builds, I have to break the rules of Lost Legends and talk about the early screenshots, which was meant to be in the pre-release chapter. Don't worry, part 2 will have a lot more pre-release content. We'll start off with the screenshots first, and slowly make our way to the July 11th build on Xbox, and the July 23rd build on PS2. There's more builds out there, but they are too close to the final August 12th build, and not worth covering as the changes are so minor. The Xbox build was played and recorded by Evo on real hardware, while I explored the PS2 version emulated. Before we start with the magazine screenshots, we should look at this particular piece shown in the game's art gallery. This is a Photoshop of the dev team in what's known to be the earliest build of Turok Evolution shown in the public. The tech bow looks more like a brown color, held in a different precision, and the craziest thing of all, no scope. The promo image in the final game's pickup model doesn't have one either, but when you pick it up, the scope is there. Can't say much about the environment, due to the dev team taking on most of the image here. Back on topic, the best place to start looking is in magazines. The good news is that the early screenshots shown are all labeled. We'll go through these in order, starting with the February 2002 issue of NGC magazine. The magazine had an 8-page preview of the game with some early screenshots, along with a small Q&A with Dino Dave. Now, Matt McMuscles, if you're watching this, Dave's last name is pronounced Deanspear. Deanspear. Got it? Okay, cool. Let's continue. The builds shown in this magazine scan are version 1.120.1207. There is also a slightly earlier 1.119.1206 for the flight mode, but it doesn't feature a HUD. Let's look at these in order. On top, there's an early screenshot of the jungle levels with the pistol, while on the bottom, it shows an early version of one of these city chapters. Take a look at that tank that never appeared in the game. The next screenshot between the pages show an early Raptor model with a different stripe pattern. The next page shows the flight mode and a clear look at the early HUD. Note the odd lighting as the shaders don't seem to be finished at this time. The next page shows the tech bow, but the scope texture is unfinished. The next page shows early versions of the suspended city chapters, the stealth chapter, and a good look at the two cut levels, the river village and the trenches. The next three screenshots are from the suspended city again, but this had slightly different lighting and weather effects. The next one shows some sort of loading bay, and the last one is an early version of the second level. Time for some of the ones shown on the web by sites like IGN, GameSpot, Mary Station, Xbox Addict, Gamers Hell, and many more. We're continuing with 1.120.1207, but moving on, we'll refer to these builds with the first four numbers, which means 1.120. The first set are clear screenshots of the jungle. Take a look at that janky water, and this compy. The next four are in the suspended city. Notice how the enemies are wielding generic tech weapons, as opposed to their usual guns. Another thing to know is that the player is using weapons that are impossible to equip during these chapters in the final game, like this pistol in the suspended city. The next piece is similar to the one from the NGC magazine, and appears to show the cut river village, albeit in a different location. The next version is 1.121, which appears to have been slightly updated. The first two screenshots looks like it takes place in the Juggernaut. Take note of the early shotgun model. The next few takes place in the multiplayer map Palace of Lamia, which was oftentimes used for testing. Another point of interest is the early War Club model, which you'll see plenty of times moving forward, along with a shotgun. The next screenshot looks like it takes place in the 5th chapter. The enemy Tal'Set is firing at could be a Slag soldier, but can't tell from being a low quality JPEG. The next build we look at is quite a bit newer, going directly from 1.121 to 1.172. The early HUD appears to have a hard time reading the cheated ammo count. This screenshot shows the early stealth chapter, the next one shows a puking slag, and the next two show the city where there's a couple vehicles that are different, the jeep at the start and a tank. 1.177 doesn't appear to be very different, but there's an early ammo pickup for what's possibly a plasma cannon or a gravity disruptor. The next screenshot is a flight stage. I scanned through some footage of the final version, and there's no trees next to this river. Judging by this, I assume this is an early version of Chapter 2. 1.184 shows a T-Rex encounter taking place in a dense jungle, which was seemingly cut from the game. 1.192 shows the second level, Jungle Hunter, along with levels from Chapter 6. The screenshot shows the raptors and compies. The final game's raptors and compies used the default skin, until the 6th chapter where some compies and raptors sport a different skin. Also, the shotgun model has been updated. 1.201 has some visual changes. The first one to show is from Chapter 7. Take note of the different lock-on icon and pickup balloon. The next one shows Tal'Set in the first level, armed with a tech bow, rocket launcher, and a flamethrower. The War Club's model has been updated, including the blood decals on it. The last set of screenshots is a mixed bag because these didn't have the version labeled. Here are some highlights. The first one we look at are the two flight mode screenshots. This takes place to what seemed to be that cut jungle level again. The static trees in the background don't appear much in the final version of Chapter 2. The next screenshot with the Xbox logo shows the player model being offset to the right, showing the pistol a little more. This screenshot here shows the player using an early version of the gravity disruptor, which appears to use the minigun as a placeholder base. The next screenshot shows a closer look at a Slag soldier. Not sure what he's holding though. The next two screenshots are from the stealth chapter, and a look at the early explosive arrows used before the July 11th build on Xbox. The last screenshot is ominous. It's a corridor, but where exactly? There are two possibilities. Inside the Slag Fortress with the Juggernaut, since these use similar textures. Okay, I lied. Here's some more from GameSpot. This shows Tal'Set fighting off some dire wolves as opposed to baboons, meaning that they got cut late in development. While you're gazing at them doggos, I should point out that the mountains in the background are not transparent, hence the weird grade that cuts off. The last one is from the official Turok site as seen through the Wayback Machine. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have been backed up very well due to these, well, broken images. This is one of the remnants. Now it's time for the builds. Right off the bat, you'll notice that the intro FMV is missing, and instead placed a Tarkeen cutscene as a placeholder. The same happens with the rest of the FMVs found in the game's files. Furthermore, at the title screen, the press start text is colored red, and the main menu theme is nowhere to be heard, instead being replaced with the track Swampy Abodes from the game's multiplayer. The cheats are also different in this build. All of them appear to work as intended, except for the all weapons cheat, which appears to be grayed out, but still works nonetheless. FM and FB, the all cheats cheat, and Zoo, aka the Zoo level, don't appear in these early builds however. The game.txt found in the root of these builds is different from the one found in the final game. The July 11th version mentioned 5 less actors compared to the final. These include Stealth Part 4 Escape Cinema, likely the cutscene at the end of Chapter 5, Ending FMV, Language Select, likely meant for PAL versions, though unused, Tyrannus 2, and Zoo, which is self-explanatory. Speaking of cut actors / levels, if you input the level select sheet and try to skip ahead of the game, a debug level select menu will appear. Unlike the final version where you can only select a chapter, this version lets you choose any level of the game, including the deathmatch ones. But it will spawn you with no health, restarting the level in an endless death loop. You can also activate the debug menu by pressing the back button. This will show you a wide variety of tools and debug functions that the devs used during development of the game. Unfortunately though, most of them are either broken, don't do anything, or work in a very limited fashion, which usually leads to chaos. But hey, at least we got the best feature. One that lets you change the color of the debug font. Remember, I got Evil to record this. Moving on to the gameplay. The player hauls ass, but he still jumps like he got cement shoes. Plus, a lot of the sounds and dialogue are either missing or incorrect. The HUD text is a little different, showing a more harsh shadow coming from the bottom, except for the zeros for some reason. These builds are also a bit more gorier than the final version of the game, replacing the piles of unrecognizable meat you usually find strewn all over the place with horrifically grotesque human corpses. Now that's a face only a mother could love. In these builds of the game, holding down the R button with the War Club does not charge up your alternate attack. Instead, you can activate it near instantly by pressing the L button. A small difference, but I thought I mentioned nonetheless. The tech bow's explosive arrows look completely different, seemingly consisting of a little red sack filled with gunpowder, feathers, and flint. The fans have nicknamed this early design the Sea Urchin, which I must say is quite humorous. I think these also act differently, as you can see the shockwave here. The Xbox build contains some unfinished game modes. The 3 that stood out the most were the co-op, Human vs Dinos, and T-Rex game modes. The co-op would have been, well, a co-op campaign. Not much is known about it, though I'd like to mention that both the beta builds and the final have files relating to this mode, those being completely separate folders and actors for the creatures and enemies you presumably encounter. Why they didn't just use the single player ones, I have no idea, but it's probably too easy with 2 players. Humans vs Dinos would have had the players fighting against a single player controlled compy. If the compy managed to kill one of the players, they would respawn as yet another compy. This will go on until the last human got killed. This predates Halo 2's Zombies game mode in terms of gameplay, though I wish they would have been more similar to Turok 2's Raptor Fest mode, honestly. Now for the T-Rex one, absolutely nothing is known about it. There is a multiplayer map internally named T-Rex, but this refers to the map Dino Depot. There are some unused multiplayer maps found in this build. These are City, Suspend, 3 extra flight maps, and 3 test levels for bots, pickups, and water physics. Unfortunately, none of them are actually playable. It's unknown if City and Suspend are just early versions of Regenerate Arena and Nepet's Towers as their theme after the Suspended City. The flight maps could be anywhere, really. However, I'm willing to bet my Blue Eyes White Dragon and $5 that one of them is just a reused Chapter 11 map. You know, the one where you have to blow up some power cores. Lastly, the art gallery features different pictures than the ones found in the final game. Most notably, a picture of David Levy and Peyton Duncan. Evo reached out to Duncan about these pictures years ago, to which he had this to say. I just watched the video. That was very unexpected, as I was unaware that photo was ever used anywhere. It was from an art school I'd taken in the 80s. After a conversation about 80s hair, specifically mullets, I brought in an old idea for amusement. The other artist's picture was David Levy, sometimes referred to as Vile. He was and is an amazingly talented artist. I always made fun of his Frenchness, and that is why an image of him existed in the first place. It was a frame from a quick animation of him singing a French children's song, Alouette, Gentile Alouette. Oh, fun memories. I have worked on a ton of titles since Turok, so my memory of these dev cycles may be a bit fuzzy. Making a game is a lot like having your kids, if you actually remember all the horrible details. You wouldn't do it again. Thank him for solving a mystery only a whopping 2 people cared about. There are a lot more minor differences that are hardly worth showing, but they might get featured in one of his videos someday. The July 23rd build for PS2 also had some differences. A lot of them are about the same as the ones found in the Xbox builds, while others are more noteworthy. For instance, during gameplay, the in-game cutscenes lack the black bars. A lot of sounds and dialogue are missing or incorrect, and while being invincible, fall damage doesn't hurt you. The weapons, on the other hand, all have their own little quirks. The pistol sniper scope is buggered, same goes for on the water, likely emulation issues. The tech bow is untextured, and the energy effects on the plasma cannon, rocket launcher, and gravity disruptor had funkier colors. Not only the models are a bit cruddy, but some of the weapons act differently as well, like the plasma cannon seeker lens, which shoots out red plasma balls with a different firing sound. That, and it consumes 5 rounds. The gravity disruptor's charged up attack doesn't work properly, and you could quote-unquote use the rocket launcher's nuke outside of the Suspended City. But that doesn't work either, so no nuking the T-Rex for you. Also, the turrets are broken too. In the flight mode, the bird feels heavier and turns wider. While recording despite my best efforts, I managed to steer my bird into a wall, and it didn't die. There is a reason why the invincibility cheat was updated to exclude fall damage. So what about multiplayer? Anything different here? To be honest, not much, apart from the lack of music that accompanies it. Judging from this document given to me by Evo, the multiplayer is still very buggy at this point in development. Let's see here, the game will crash if you pause it twice in a row, the message to respawn only shows the R1 button, when it should be showing the R2 button, your controller will start vibrating uncontrollably after being killed by a minigun, and will continue to do so until you quit the game. The alternate control scheme hasn't been fully implemented yet. Water on some levels don't use the final textures. Tons of shader, lighting, and fog issues. One that was so bad that the fast fog technique was temporarily removed from this build. And the list goes on. Oh, and there's the raptors. And they're bugged. So if one player plays as an Ep and the other as Malk, then an Ep skeleton will become a glitched out monstrosity worthy of being featured in a Dead Space game. When the players use the opposite raptors, however, then it plays absolutely fine. apart from player 2 showing the wrong raptor model anyway. The game also crashes if you try to switch weapons as the raptors, which will clearly show the war clubs for a split second. This means that the weapon system in this game works similarly to the one found in Turok 2, where the Triceratops you're riding is actually just a cleverly disguised gun or pickup. It's a miracle they got this mostly stable within 3 weeks of it getting shipped, despite being on the less than favorable PS2 version. We almost forgot about the art gallery. To your left are from the beta builds, while on the right is the final PC version, the contents of which had to be converted from DDS files into PNGs. Trust me, it's quite tedious. Now, normally it would continue to ramble on, but this is the end of part 1. I mean, Jesus, look at the time. Part 2 is found exclusively on Evolution Archive's channel, so go check that out when you have the chance. Not interested? Then allow me to entice you with this never-before-seen in-house greenlight cinematic. Hungry for more? Part 2 has everything you're looking for, and then some. From the trailers, early gameplay, design documents, and we're spending half of that video's length talking about the cut content, which I have to tell you is a whole goldmine to sift through. By the way, part 2 is linked in the description or pinned comments, but also right on the screen as we speak. I'll continue this episode from there.